Welcome to another installment of Beyond the Headlines, which takes a behind the scenes look at goings on at the Post and Courier and how we do our stories. I'm Glenn Smith. I'm the Watchdog and Public Service Editor for the paper. And with me here today are projects reporter Avery Wilks, David Slade, a senior reporter who's written about everything from growth and development to finance and government, just about everything, and Olivia Diaz, who's on our quick response team and writes about crime, emergency, breaking news, public safety, all sorts of things like that. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone the event is being recorded. It will be sent out after the event with contact info in case any of you have any more questions. Also would encourage anyone to submit questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Okay, we're here today to celebrate Sunshine Week, which was launched in 2005 and has grown into an enduring initiative to promote open government. Transparency in government is crucial to a functioning democracy, and in South Carolina, the State Freedom of Information Act is a tool for making sure that happens. The FOIA guarantees citizens access to public records and meetings of government bodies. This helps the public to learn more about the performance of public officials and how taxpayer dollars are being spent. At the Post and Courier, we are known to make heavy use of the FOIA to carry out our role as watchdogs of government. It's ingrained in most everything we do. The newspaper was recently honored for this work by the South Carolina Press Association for exercising unusual diligence and courage in furthering access to public information. I'm here today with some of the reporters whose hard work made that award possible. I'm going to start with you, David. You used the FOIA to uncover an award-winning series of articles on a secretive $216,000 deal between Charleston County and its former in-house attorney, Joe Dawson, as he was being confirmed as a federal judge. Your reporting prompted an ongoing judicial ethics investigation and changes to the contract that benefited taxpayers. Tell us a little bit about how that story came to light and the FOIA issues that were at stake there.
Oh, thanks, Glenn. So in December of 2020, Charleston County's attorney was confirmed as a federal judge. And soon after that, we were hearing rumors that he'd made a deal with the county on his way out the door. And so we filed a FOIA, and our request revealed that the county had in fact agreed to pay him $216,000 for a year of what they called his insight and institutional knowledge while he was serving as a federal judge. Now, federal judges aren't allowed to provide legal services to people. So the questions were raised with that contract and prompted the ethics investigation you mentioned, which is ongoing. And our FOIA also revealed in this contract that had not been discussed publicly or voted on publicly, that the county had also promised Joe Dawson a percentage of any money the county might receive from federal litigation over opioid pharmaceuticals. Now, one of the things that happened after our reporting was the county revised that contract and eliminated the provision for him to get a percentage of that money. They did pay him the $216,000, and the investigation into ethics continues, but without FOIA, we would not have been able to report all those details.
Yeah, that just sort of came out of nowhere, didn't it? And you jumped right on it and brought that into the light, which I don't think was appreciated by a lot of county officials.
No, probably not. I'm sharing a link in the chat to the first story that resulted from that. And then we also wrote stories about that eventually revealed that the contract in question was written by the county's attorney himself. And we also did some reporting on how they do just so much of their business in closed door executive sessions. And that's brought a little bit of pressure on them to dial that back a bit.
Yeah, how much was that, by the way? That was a really good FOIA story. How much time did they spend behind closed doors?
Without looking at the story, I want to say roughly half their time.
That seems to be my recollection as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Olivia, you were involved in reporting on what was perhaps the biggest story to come out of the Low Country last year, the killings of two members of the prominent Murdaugh family down in Hampton County. In the early days of that case, the public was clamoring for information and authorities were saying next to nothing. What happens when there is that vacuum of information in a high-profile case like that? And what efforts did you and the Post and Courier undertake to break that log jam and get that information out to people?
Yeah, I guess, well, full disclosure, that was my second week on the job. So I just started at the Post and Courier, and before I know it, I was shipped off to Carlton County and Hampton County to report on the killings of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. I think when there's a high profile case and there's no information coming from those investigating it, two really big things could happen. One, just being misinformation, because so many people were interested in what happened to Maggie and Paul and still are interested. You know, blogs were kind of running amok with all these different theories and stating them as if they were fact. And there was really no consensus as to what happened that night, just the, bare bones, because you were hearing nothing from the county. So that led to a lot of misinformation, which I think, just reaffirms the need for just open communication between investigators and the community. And I also think what came out of that was it kind of set a precedent. So I guess our worries at the time were, if we're not getting information now, what's going to happen as this investigation actually takes off? And we wanted to kind of set the expectations that we needed communication from investigators. So I went to Carroll County and I went to the sheriff's office, and I spoke to deputies and I spoke to their spokeswoman, and they gave me the incident report, which was not really the incident report. It was one sentence. It didn't have any of the background information. The timestamps really had nothing. It was just one sentence. And I said, I will just sit in the waiting room until you can get me the report. And they said, well, the report has too much information. It would impede the investigation. And then I kind of stood my ground a bit. I was very scared because it was my second week, but I said, yes. I will wait here while you redact the file in this waiting room. Then they said, Slade has to release the file. So the next day, another reporter went to Slade's office and did, to my understanding, the same thing, to which they said, we will not be releasing this report. So that kind of ultimately led to the Post and Courier filing suit for the incident report and supplemental reports, which we ended up getting. So it's a whirlwind, but I think it just kind of stressed, the need for information to deter from misinformation, and then to also set the precedents for our reporting to come. And we still have quite a bit of reporting to do on that story. So I think it was worth it.
Yeah, and I remember like one of the big things in the early days of that was, we obviously had two people dead, fatally shot at this hunting lodge. And Slade says, we don't have any suspects, but we want to assure the public that there's no danger to anyone out there. And that was wildly confusing to people because, well, somebody just killed two people on this, large estate here, and you haven't caught them yet. Why is there no danger to the community? So that was very confusing. And as you said, we filed that lawsuit. And I think one of the things, as you pointed out, that helped clarify was that I guess Slade now has sort of taken on more of a lead role in getting that information out, because before you'd go to different agencies and Slade, and they'd be like, go to that guy. But I can imagine that must have been quite the experience for you in your second week on the job.
I'd never been, I just moved to South Carolina too. So never been to the state, never been, first job at a paper. So it was a good experience though. I learned a lot really quickly.
You got to see a lot of the lower part of the Low Country those couple of weeks. Yeah. Avery. So open record requests have played a really critical role in our ongoing uncovered investigation. That's where the Post and Courier has teamed up with 18 community newspapers around the state to look into questionable conduct and corruption of government officials. How many FOIA requests have we filed to date, if you recall? What kind of stories did your particular requests yield, and what are some of the obstacles you encountered along the way?
So far, based on our tracker that we've kept internally, we've filed at least 50. I think that's a severe undercount because at my last check, I was the only person still adding them to the tracker, and other people maybe are filing some and not logging them there. but they've been really critical in our stories. I was just going back through a list of some of the ones I've written. We got travel records and receipts and restaurant purchase records for a suspended city councilman in Chester, South Carolina, who was jet setting all over the country for conferences at a time when he was suspended from office and likely knew that he was never actually going to be able to serve as a city councilman and was about to be booted from public office. We got bank records showing really questionable spending by the leaders of a fire department in Simpsonville in the upstate. And more recently, we got emails and checks showing the clerk of court in Williamsburg County was directing $30,000 of a federal fund she controls to herself as a raise, which ballooned her own pay to about $92,000 in a county where the average, income is about $32,000. And that spending is currently under investigation by the state law enforcement division. So we've been able to get our hands on a lot of records that were pretty critical, and the stories literally could not have been written without them. A few obstacles that we typically come across are cost and time. We see more often with the newest edition of this law that officials and agencies can charge a lot more than they used to be able to charge for public records. And we're seeing this change in attitude where public officials seemingly don't want to lift a finger to help the public get access to information without, having the requester break open their wallet first. Sometimes the costs are reasonable, sometimes they're not, and it's the same way with time. It really is up to the way that the person you're requesting the information from wants to treat the request. Of course, the law allows them 10 days to actually respond to your request, and then, more than a month and potentially longer to actually give you the records. Sometimes we file really simple requests. We just want a copy of an email or a personnel file, something that they could get to us within 15 minutes, but instead they wait the full 10 days to actually acknowledge our request, and then, the full 30 business days to actually give us the document. And typically, again, the law just allows a range of replies, and how agencies actually reply to them sort of depend on the person answering your email, whether they're friendly to the press or not, B, whether what you're requesting is sort of difficult for them to retrieve or easy for them to retrieve, and C, whether what you're requesting might be embarrassing to them. And typically, if I'm getting a lot of pushback from a public agency, I find that means that I'm on the right track.
Yeah, the Williamsburg one is a great example, right? Because there was sort of like a whisper campaign around town about that for weeks, about this mysterious raise, and was it 20,000 or 30,000 or just what was at stake there? And then, right in those documents, buried in the 150 pages that got dumped on us at about 5 o'clock at night, if you recall.
That's right.
Yeah, right somewhere around page 75, there it was in the ledger, and with the county attorney saying, I can't get my head around what's going on here and how she was able to do that, and it laid it out pretty clear. So that was helpful. And
like you said, that's a case where I spoke to, close to a dozen people around Williamsburg County who knew what this was, but clearly didn't know exactly what it was, because everyone was giving me a different number. Some people were saying it was a bonus. Some people were saying it was a raise. Some people were saying it was $60,000, others $22,000. And so it's a clear case where, had we not been able to FOIA for the actual records, we could not have confidently and accurately reported that story. So FOIA was extremely critical to us there.
Right. David, FOIA requests can yield a mountain of documents that reporters have to sift through for clues to the larger story. Can you give us some background on one of your more memorable cases and how you followed that paper trail to the deeper story that government officials really didn't want people to see, or held government officials accountable?
Sure, absolutely. First I want to, Avery made me think of this. I mean, sometimes it sounds really simple, like, oh, we just file a FOIA and the governments give us everything. And Avery's on point. That's absolutely not the case. I remember when we were reporting on civil asset forfeitures, where where the police can basically take your stuff without charging you with a crime if they think it's crime related. We filed a bunch of FOIAs to find out what local police departments were seizing and why. And some of them pushed back really hard. I mean, Somerville basically told us we couldn't have those things.
Right.
And then we had to point out to them that the state law requires them to have reports that anyone should be able to walk in off the street and look at without even filing a FOIA. But I mean, it took weeks to sort this out with them just to convince them that these were things they had to give us. To answer your question, one of the more complicated investigations I've been involved in covered the failed redevelopment of the Charleston Naval Hospital. And that was a deal that cost Charleston County taxpayers more than $35 million and got national attention because Donald Trump Jr. had helped convince local officials the whole thing was a good idea. And this all played out over 6 years with lots of daily and weekend reports. And when it finally all ended in bankruptcy court, we took a deep look at what had gone wrong and filed some extensive FOIAs that, Glenn, you'll remember this, put hundreds of pages of county documents in our hands and thousands of emails. And it took a while to chew through it all, but in the end, we were able to put together a really detailed package laying out this whole complicated multi-year saga that cost taxpayers just so much. And I'm going to post a link to that in the group chat.
Yeah, to your point, that civil asset forfeiture story there just made me shudder a little bit, because I remember when you and I went up to Columbia, the Richland, the solicitor's office up there said, sure, you can take a look at these records. We finally got them together for you. And we got there and there's about 12 or 16 crates, tens of thousands of pages that we were going through. Yeah, I think we were saying the other night at one of the uncovered events that sometimes people, I think of this glamorous investigative reporting job where you're meeting someone in an underground basement and they're handing you this secret stuff. And I guess that happens sometimes, but more often than not, it's digging through mountains of paper until you're like, aha, here it is, Okay, so Olivia, as a frontline crime reporter, you encounter all sorts of FOIA obstacles trying to extract information from police in a timely manner when news is breaking. What are some of the more common challenges you face, and how do you deal with those obstacles while racing to meet deadline? Also, why is it so important for you and other breaking news reporters to get that crime and emergency information out to the public so quickly?
I think one of the biggest challenges is probably kind of what I struggled with the Murdaugh case, where agencies are unsure who is required to release what information or who's responsible, especially if, many times for many, even if you wanted 911 audio, that it goes through county dispatch, even though North Charleston or Charleston County Sheriff's Office is investigating the case. So that typically is a struggle I encounter a lot. We're speaking 911 audio. There was a police shooting in January, and because we don't have access to police scanners, we heard about it a couple of days afterward, and we were trying to get more context as to what happened that night. We were canvassing the neighborhood, talking to neighbors, but we also wanted to hear, the voices of those who initially heard shots fired. And just getting that 911 audio was a huge obstacle for us. That really was a back and forth between us, the police agency, the dispatch, and for a second, they turned us to the solicitor's office, who promptly turned us back. So that, I think, is an example of sometimes agencies might not be clear as to, what they can and cannot, what they're required to release and what they can hold on to, and then who is required to release what. So I think that's my biggest obstacle, but we definitely put up a good fight for it for a good reason. I think getting it out quickly kind of goes back to that misinformation, especially if it's a homicide. It's, people want to feel that they're safe. People want to know if they are safe. If there's someone out there, they want to know. And misinformation really can just permeate, I think, in communities. I thought about that with, Avery, when you were saying the amounts differ from person to person. I feel like for many, hot stories. You know, the grapevine is a powerful thing for getting tips, but you need confirmation because it is a grapevine. And people hear different things and see different things. So I think it's important to get it out in a timely manner and to, you know, file those requests immediately, because the stakes are high. I think, you know, there's a big price to pay. People don't really know what's happening.
You just brought up another good point, Olivia, with the 911 tapes, and having to sort of go back over things that have already been determined by the courts and convince agencies that we are entitled to them. Years ago in the early 2000s, there was a police involved shooting in North Charleston, which fatally wounded a man. And we fought to get those 911 tapes, and they wouldn't give it to us. And we went all the way to the Supreme Court and got a ruling that said those are just like police reports. You are entitled to those in a timely manner. And for many years, they provided them as a matter of course, just for asking. Now, suddenly they're backsliding on that and coming up with new reasons why not to give you 911 tapes in a timely manner. So sometimes it's relitigating the same issues that have already been settled clearly by the courts. Avery, on our Uncovered page, we have a citizen FOIA toolbox to help people file their own open records requests. Because as you pointed out at the beginning, this is not just stuff for journalists. This is stuff the public is entitled to. You file a lot of requests and generate some eye-popping dollar signs in terms of quotes for what it's going to take to fulfill them. I believe the record was one that Tony was talking about the other night from MUSC asking for $275,000 for some employee emails. Charleston police once quoted us $200,000 to get some records about stops of people who were not later arrested. How do you navigate situations like that? And what tips can you offer to people about how to get information they're looking for without breaking the bank and doing so?
Yeah, negotiating FOIA fees and the release of records is a big part of what I do now. And I'm not typically a confrontational person, but this is an area where I have to sort of make myself into that and play hardball a little bit. I think it's important to do for a few reasons. One, newspapers aren't always super flush with cash. Average people don't have hundreds of dollars to spend on records. And two, we don't want to establish precedent by spending a bunch of money on these records and telling agencies that it's okay to charge us this, because it's really not. So it's important for no matter what they quote us. If they quote us $1,000, I want to negotiate that down. If they quote $10, I want to ask why even bother, cashing a $10 check. So it's a big part of what I do. The first thing I might try is calling them over the phone. I tend to find that human phone conversations are a really good way to diffuse these situations. And try to understand why the dollar amount is so large, and explain that I do think it is large. Try to understand, is it because you're going to have to go retrieve really old records? Is it because the records only exist in paper format and they're buried in a landfill somewhere? I mean, try to get them to really spell out how they came up with their estimate of the fee, and then try to pick that apart. And try to understand, how can I avoid that? If you're saying it's going to take 10 hours to pull all these emails that I've requested, is there a way I can narrow my request so I get exactly what I want, and it takes you less time to pull it, which is what they want, and it costs me less for them to pull it, which is what I want. Are there ways for me to argue, that? But one other thing I'll try to do is just, with all the experience I've got with FOIAs are, if the city of Columbia is charging me $200 for a personnel record, as they recently did, I tried to explain to them that I've never been charged that much for a personnel record, a personnel file, and most agencies will give them to me for free. So knowing kind of what the going rate is for the documents you're looking for can be super helpful, and sort of trying to shame them into saying like, hey, why are you the only ones who are charging me this outrageous amount for the records that everyone else provides for $20 or for free? And really just trying to work with them and negotiate those things down. And if all else fails, as we've done, as other people have done, you can always, resort to publicly shaming them, writing about agencies that won't provide records or charging exorbitant amounts in the newspaper is a tactic we've resorted to several times. But average people, they can go on Facebook, they can go on Twitter, they can alert their neighbors to the fact that this agency is charging a ton of money for something that should be public information. So you kind of try to de-escalate it first, use all those tactics that are at your disposal, but then worst comes to worst, you might have to sort of go into a more public battle against them.
Okay, we got a few questions ahead of time. I thought I'd get to those now. One, here's a real sort of hands-on thing. I was going to ask Olivia. Somebody asked about, they were talking about a case, a DUI case in their area, and they were trying to find out sort of the status of a case. Once somebody's arrested and you hear about this, how would you go about finding where that case is at in the court system and what might have happened, how it was adjudicated?
So depending on how old the case is and what county is in, there are a couple options. If the case is in Charleston, the county has a really good resource called Court Plus, and you can either type in the court case number or the person's name, and that can give you a status as to where it is in terms of going to trial, if it hasn't gone to trial yet, whether the case is pending, whether it's ended, and if it's ended, what the charges are. Across the state, there's also, for other counties, there's the public index, which on the court side of things, that's a way to monitor cases as they work their way through the court system. And then even afterward, once they've ended. And in terms of if there hasn't been any arrests made, but the police are investigating, I think I would recommend just going to the department directly, and see if there are also any reporters in the area monitoring. You can also probably reach out to a news source and see. That's always at least a good resource to start if departments aren't being cooperative.
Okay. Avery, another question here. Is there a maximum deadline to receive FOIA information after a request?
Yes, that is one of the good things in the FOIA law that didn't used to be there. Previously, agencies only had to respond to your request and acknowledge that you got it, and then there was really no back-end deadline for them to actually turn the documents over. The law changed after some lobbying from newspapers, I believe in 2017. The upside of the law is that there are deadlines. The downside is that agencies can charge us more now. But essentially, there's two sets of deadlines, and it totally depends on whether you are requesting information that is older than 2 years old. If the documents you're looking for are less than 2 years old, they have 10 days to respond to you, 10 business days, and then 30 days to actually provide you the records after they respond. So that's like a maximum of 40 days there. And if the documents are older than 2 years old, they have, I believe it's 20 days. I'm going to get this wrong, but they have a little bit longer to respond to you initially. And then I think 35 days. 35 days. So there are back-end deadlines for them to get you those records. And I will typically track my FOIAs in an Excel sheet. And I'll also mark them on my written calendar so that I can follow up with FOIA officers and government agencies and say, hey, by the way, this FOIA is due in a day, or it was due yesterday and I haven't gotten anything from you. You are now in violation of South Carolina law. Like, what's going on here? And then sometimes they'll say, oh, sorry, like we missed it. Can we get an extension or something like that? But definitely once you file the FOIA, make sure you understand the deadlines and keep track of whether agencies are in compliance. And you're welcome to kind of be tough on them if they're not following the rules.
Yeah, open records lawyers have told me that if they don't respond in the timely manner, if they miss that deadline, that's tacit approval to your request, and you can just say, okay, you did not respond, you need to turn those over now. I have not found that always to be a successful argument with some of the agencies I've dealt with, but it's worth a try. David, here's one that you've dealt a lot with finance and business and all sorts of secretive stuff, Naval Hospital and some of these things. What tools are available to journalists to get inside private corporations to get information? How do you go about sleuthing around about some private businesses that aren't subject to FOIA, if you want to find out a little bit about them?
Sorry, I had to unmute there. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Public information laws don't allow us to get directly into private corporations, but FOIAs and regulatory filings do help. like with corporations, filings that are required by the Securities and Exchange Commission can provide lots of insight. And we've seen that play out in coverage of South Carolina's nuclear power plant debacle and also some other utility issues. I mean, just a short example that I remember is when back when SCE&G was still around, they had this controversial program where they were averaging out people's electric bills, and they claimed it was to help their customers, and it was all good. And then, but when I looked up the regulatory filing, it was very plain how they were talking about how much money this was worth to them and how much money it would cost if they stopped doing that. And that helped prompt the state officials to tell them, you got to stop doing that. So federal filings are good for corporations, but again, you can't just FOIA a corporation for information. What you can do is FOIA local governments for things like tax incentive deals. And we've done that quite a bit. The only unfortunate part is there are gaps in the state's public record laws, and one of them is that governments typically don't have to tell people about real estate deals and tax incentives until it's pretty much a done deal. And at which point it's pretty hard for the public to get involved and say, no, don't do that. That looks like a bad deal, because it's usually already a done deal. So it's kind of a good news, bad news thing with getting into local, into companies.
Yeah, I remember too, we've written about how the Commerce Department, when former reporter here, Andrew Brown, spent years trying to get information on incentive deals. And what he was able to get in sort of the end showed that they often did not claw back money given as incentives, even if the businesses failed to meet those hiring goals and other promises that they'd met. So there's ways to get it, or go to the Secretary of State's office and corporation papers. Sometimes we'll shed some light on things. It's pretty much kind of going to every little sort of nook and cranny you can find to find little things about the business and build it out from there.
Yeah, one thing I would add is, I guess this is maybe not exactly so much about how citizens can use FOIA, but one thing I know that we all do is find ways to FOIA things to get around other people not giving us things that we can't get with a FOIA. I mean, Glenn, you'll remember when we did the piece on just how bonkers South Carolina's taxation of vehicles is. Mm-hmm. And the state wouldn't give us the information. They said, oh, the way we value vehicles for property taxes is proprietary. It's secret. We won't tell you that.
That's right.
Well, we turned around and we FOIA'd Charleston County's database of property taxes on vehicles, which they had to give us, and basically reverse engineered how the state was valuing all these vehicles. Because we had such a large sample size, we were able to do that. And then we were able to report that some of these vehicle tax values are just completely wrong. And people were either paying too much or too little. And this was all information.
Place,
yeah, all information we couldn't have gotten from the state, just saying, show us how you value these things.
So you got to be creative sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're about out of time here. I want to thank everyone for watching. Remember, you can sign up for any of our free newsletters at postingcourier.com/newsletter-sign up. If you're a subscriber, we'd like to say thank you. If you're not a subscriber, you can sign up at postingcourier.com/subscribe. Thanks again. Till next time, have a great day.